very good evening to all of you who have joined in. Uh, Before I start, I would like to share a few facts, or how are we going to spend the next couple of minutes in understanding what exactly corporate governance is and how do you benefit out of it. So first of all, this is not an academic session. So I'll not be, taking the typical route of explaining things and then doing a case study or maybe trying to give you some theoretical stuff. Rather, my intent today is that, in the given scenario, when we feel uh, that there is a need of some rules to be in place in the startup domain, and while we also are witnessing the fall of Byju's, uh, we all know that there is something which needs to be done. But things are quite complicated. Things have blown out of proportion, especially if you see Byju's, that it was one of the most valued enterprises at a point of time. And today, its value has been eroded for many reasons. Further, even employees don't want to go and join this company. People are not ready to give loans, so on and so forth. But fundamentally, if you ask me, Byju's, I mean, the founders, their knowledge, their uh, deliverables, whatever was let's focus on what can go wrong and how can we prepare in a real life situation. So the second most important thing is, you'll have a lot of understanding of mechanics that go into running a company. Now, what do I mean by running a company? It means that, you should not only look at one aspect, like say, whenever we make a presentation for, financing, or because I'm a part of some incubation centers, I have seen we do a lot of uh, fancy PPTs, a lot of research on maybe the product, on maybe how we will capitalize the market, on how we will generate revenue. But still, there is a gap. And it happens from both ends. It's not only your fault as a entrepreneur or a startup person, but it's also our fault at the incubation centers that we may at times overlook things which should have been there in the very initial stage. So the point that I'll try to make is that over the past, say, maybe 4 years or 5 years that have been associated with various startups, incubation centers, and because of my corporate exposure of around, say, 20 years, I have tried to bring down a kind of a checklist for you. There are many items that I have missed. I'll start with a disclaimer because I know there are lawyers in this forum. So I'll start with a typical disclaimer that I have missed out on many things. But I am sure that at the end of the session, you will understand the correlation of certain factors based on which you will be in a better position to understand where you missed out, or how should you approach the new venture, or even if you are from the incubation center, or if you're from a bank who's going to give loan to a new startup, at least you will be forced, or rather you will on your own go back to the drawing board and again flip through the pages as to just confirm that you have not missed out something. So that I can guarantee. But yes, there are misses. It will happen because business is something that evolves. And it is futile to have the approach that we'll have a sacrosanct checklist. Okay, you have a checklist and do the ticking and then your business will survive. So that is futile. It doesn't happen. So the first thing, okay, let me quickly, okay. I hope the slides are visible now. Uh, these slides are okay, right? It's visible. Shiva or anyone, just, the slides are okay? It's visible?
Yes, sir, they are.
Perfect, perfect. So like I told you, we have two main characters, Byju's and obviously uh, one of the most important person in corporate governance domain, Mr. Mohandas Pai. But before I go into dissecting what has happened in Byju's from an interview that Mr. Mohandas Pai has given in May, I think, 2024, I would like you to I would like you to appreciate that, we are growing at a phenomenal rate. And these are the figures. We were like negligent in maybe say when the entire thing started with say small figures. But today, if you see, the concept of unicorn has become so common. The concept of unicorn, when it was say 5 years back, it was a celebration. It called for celebration, but now it's a common fact. Every nowadays we are finding such new ventures coming up and hitting the mark. But at the same time, if you see, this has also brought in some issues wherein the value and the valuation are two different things. Now, what do I mean by that? Most of the times, because of many funding mechanisms, the value of the actual firm, the operations, does not match with the valuation. Now, valuation is something which could be engineered in a way by the stakeholders, primarily maybe the investors, or it could be engineered in some way to show a very, very rosy picture. But deep down, maybe the actual operations, the order size, the execution strategy, the customers, employees are not so happy, which actually does not reflect the true valuation, which means if you have a valuation of 100, your actual value could be as low as 1. Now, this is not fraud as such, but this is how you manipulate figures, how you project yourself. And this has been a major issue in downfall for many of the startups that we have seen. Further on, now there's a craze that most of the startups aim for going public, which means they are not very satisfied, or their trajectory does not end with being a startup. Most of the startups, after a period of say 5 years, 10 years, whatever they feel, are aiming for getting listed. Now that again has its own pros and cons, but that calls for more and more cautious approach, because as most of you would understand, getting listed means that more and more public money is coming into this entity, and more risks will come along with it. Now, given this picture, the risk factors, the return factors are quite high. The market size is big. I was just reading an article by Amitabh Kant. He has just mentioned that we will go full steam ahead with startups, and in a way, it's a fact that many of the startups have been able to generate a lot of employment also. So it's necessary. You just can't do away with it. Mohandas Pai. There's no need to give any introduction to this gentleman. He was with Infosys, and he's a stalwart in the domain of corporate governance. And luckily, he was also associated with Byju's. Now, I remember, in March 2023, uh, no, it's 2024 rather, March. I was talking to some of my students, and they were asking me, "Sir, what's your take on Byju's?" So I said, "Look, as long as there are two gentlemen associated with Byju's in capacity as board advisors, that is Mohandas Pai, and the other gentleman was SBI's chairman, uh, I will say Byju's can still revive. Obviously, I'll not invest in Byju's because it is a company which is into some trouble, and it has not been able to come out with lot of flying colors. So I will not invest, but I'll not lose hope as long as these two gentlemen are on the board and they are trying to revive Byju's. Unfortunately, May 2024, just 2 months from March, these two gentlemen resigned. Now, if you ask me, I am sure that maybe Byju's would not be able to come out of this situation it is in. Now, in May, when Mr. Pai had resigned, he had given an interview to, I think, Economic Times, and I was just going through the interview. Now, if you see the kind of questions and answers, and the kind of statements he has made, Just read the interview in fragments, the way I have culled out, and you will see the most important question as to what governance is, how should it be handled, is answered in that interview itself. He says very well summarized what happened in this company, what should be the approach, and things related to it. Now, see, in Byju's, we know that apart from the husband and wife couple, right? I am not aware of who are the CEOs, CFOs, and who's the head of business, VP. Maybe I am ignorant. I agree. I'm ignorant to that extent that I don't know who the CFO is, or who the other people are in Byju's. I only know the founding members, right? Now, when you have a star CEO like Ravindran, I hope I got his name right, Ravindran only. So, if you have a star CEO like this, do you expect him to get into mundane jobs of, maybe to check whether the GST returns have been filed or not, whether some litigation is going to work in his favor or not, or maybe something else? See, you have to understand he's an academician. He's an academician. He's a trainer. He's very good with maths. So his his forte is that only. Now, first thing that you have to keep in mind is that if you are good at one thing, you are good at one thing. Let's not try to superimpose ourselves and try to say that if I'm good in maths, I'll also be good in law. I'll also be good in understanding how to give bribes, and I also will be a very good marketing person. It may not be possible, and it is not possible. So let's first of all agree to that. Let's agree to that if you are good in one thing, you are the best in that area, but you cannot be the best in every area. And that's the main scenario that we see in many of the startups. Especially in case of Byju's, if you see the star, the CEO was so good, but then maybe he was not able to understand how the board performs, or how the companies operate. And you can't blame him for that. You can't blame him for that. He's human just like you and me. So when you have a star CEO, our expectation from the position of a CEO that he'll be, able to manage everything flawlessly is somehow overestimating the human capability. Next, in India. Now, in India, when funding comes in, I've seen, I mean, very recently, only yesterday, a young guy connected with me on LinkedIn, and the first post he wrote was, I have nothing against him. The first thing that he wrote to me was, "Sir, I represent such and such equity firm, and if you have clients who would like to raise equity, uh, please connect with me." Now, I was just going through his LinkedIn profile. He's a freshly qualified graduate from a very well-known management college. So I don't blame him. It is his job to connect with people like me and others. But the fact remains that people who are managing large funds today have actually had no hands-on experience in running an entity. You have to agree. Think about it. See, I'm not being sarcastic, I'm not being skeptical, but just think, the large chunk of people who come to you for investor meet, or large chunk of people who come to you for taking up equity in your startup, are really young people, or maybe they are just your age, or maybe they are younger than you. And ask them, the only experience they have in corporate world is what they had done in their summer internship, or maybe the first job, or what they had learned in a B school. Now, B school and actual life are totally different. They are totally different. In B school everything is straight. In business everything is crooked. So people in India who actually fund these entities may not have hardcore governance experience. Whereas in US, the reason is US market is more stabilized. It is more aged. It's more mature. So obviously through experience, the fund managers, they have more experience, and they have a lot of hands-on ability to control governance situations. So obviously, when you bring in funding from any of these sources, the people are not in a position to help you out when you are in a bad situation. So your expectation is somebody has invested in your firm in the equity, so you may approach him, sir, I am facing a difficulty, kuch batao kaise kare. But he also has his drawback. You must understand, he's a young person just like you, and he has no way of helping you. Third most important, now again, this comes with valuation. Like I told you, the value and the valuation are totally different, because most of the investors, they are looking at how quickly they can generate the return on investment, and most of the time try and appreciate that uh, the breed of investors that we have are called fair weather friends. Now, how did I coin this word fair weather friends? Because when we were young, when I was in college, we did not have this concept of startup and everything. So we wanted to borrow money. So one of the most lucrative ways of borrowing money in those days, I'm talking of around say 2000, was fixed deposits. So what companies used to do is uh, they used to have fixed deposits, and the rate of return on those deposits was much higher than any bank would give. Say if the bank was giving 4%, a company which is accepting fixed deposits would give say 20%. And many of those fixed deposits primarily were unsecured, which means if the company's cash flow was not good, then they were not able to pay up the principal amount and interest also. So then it was like, there was a time when a lot of fixed deposits were floating in the market. People were investing because it was better than the banking returns, and then it crashed. So similarly, when you're looking at the investments here, the people who invest, they know that as long as everything is good, like fixed deposits also, the moment you hear something wrong about the company, the fixed depositors would straight away go to the company and encash their fixed deposits. They were not like people who hold equity that, okay, chalo dekhte hain, we'll stay with the company, we'll try to revive. No, we were fair with our friends. You invest, you stay as long as the weather is good in the company. The moment you sense there is something going to happen, you withdraw. So this is also how most of the private equities or the venture capital funds operate. So you can't blame them, it is their business model as such. Next, exit. Now exit is something which they plan ahead before investing. Now if it is a exit wherein somebody wants to sell the stake, it is okay. The venture capitalist is selling its stake to the owners, and the owners are buying it. It is a private deal, perfect with it. But the most important factor is becoming ambitious enough to list yourself. Now, I would really like to see all these startups get listed someday. Now, in one of the colleges that I teach, we were doing a analysis of the prospectus of say boat, right? And we did an analysis of many of the prospectuses, and even say Nika is a success story. It got listed. It was all across the newspapers. But today, if you ask me, I don't know what's happening with Nika, right? Please try and understand, getting listed is achievable, but then before you get listed, you must know how to sustain as a listed company. Now, and listing, if you ask me in layman term, listing is like test cricket. It is not a one day match. ये one day match नहीं है कि you come, you hit, you score and you go away. ये एक test cricket है. You have to sustain, and you have to maintain everything, your communications, your disclosures, this and that. Now, in order to sustain, you must have a preparation of at least 2 to 3 years before you actually plan for listing. But you see, our history, most companies are in existence for say around fairly enough 5 years, 6 years, and they will think कि चलो in 5 years हो गए, अब तो list करना है. Like listing has become a target. It's become a target कि the moment you have a startup today, हम कब list करेंगे. भाई fundamentals तो अपने position पे लाओ, understand the business, learn how to survive, and then think of listing. And when you're thinking of listing, it means that you have to prepare, and you have to prepare really well. So when you're creating a startup, think of how well you want to run your business as a startup. Don't create a startup, because startup is the pathway, or startup is the first step to get listed. You understand? Listing is a totally different ball game. You have to put in a lot of mechanisms, and that's the reason. Kya hota hai? Say a startup in the startup stage, unless it is listed as a private company, it is doing really well. But the moment it gets listed, there is euphoria. Oh, hum listed ho gaye. NSE, BSE, our stocks are going high. Dekho ye ho raha hai. You hire Shah Rukh Khan, or you hire somebody to do your ad, and what happens? All of a sudden you see there is a stagnation in your valuation, or there are issues. So listing has to be well planned. It cannot be the destiny of a startup. It has to be a process. It has to be a process which you will graduate into. It cannot be the destiny. Next, obviously, furthermore, is, when you are crossing a kind of a funding threshold of, say, here he's talked about, say, 500 USD. So you must think of uh, the people that you are hiring in the sense, people you have on board. Because please understand, as long as the corpus is a small amount, 1 crore, 10 crore, the stakeholders are also small, and the probability of any kind of governance issue does not arise. But the moment you have more and more multiple people investing in your company, more and more money coming into your company, the probability of governance issue starts. So for every tranche of investment that you get in a year, you should reconsider the kind of people you have on the board, whether those people are equipped to help you if things go wrong. And to end with, I told you that the star CEO is always there to listen to the board of directors. He always abides by the board of directors, because he thinks that the board of directors exists to guide him. But the problem is that if, in a way, the board of directors start interrupting, or start interfering in the day-to-day affairs, which the typical owner does not like, the processes don't work well. I mean, somebody had put in a question as to, how can a startup work in a family business scenario. So most of the startups are family business, but the problem here lies with the mentality of the promoter. Now, quickly coming on to understanding something. Now, why? Now, this is a new term, maybe for most of you. This is new. I would again confess that this is a new term that I had learned maybe a month back. Technology readiness level, TRL. Now, I see a lot of presentations being made. I have seen many of the startups coming up with some business model, wherein they talk of technology which is still in infancy in India. इंडिया में वो tried and tested है भी है, तो it is in pilot stage. वो विदेशों में हो रहा है, so they try to replicate. देखो हम यहाँ कर लेंगे, वैसा कर लेंगे. But see, we are people, we will give you money when we have black and white evidence. So the first thing as a promoter that you should see is whether the technology, because see, nowadays rarely there is a startup which is not dependent or is not trying to promote technology, right? So technology on which you're going to bank, is it at all at a very stable stage? Now, this is a business model which has been in use in NASA, and it has also been accepted in the European Union. So if you see, if your technology level is at, say, TRL 1 or 2, it means the dependency of that technology is unpredictable. You don't know whether it will survive in India in the given scenario, whether it would work or not. So what happens? How does it impact your business plan? Now, if your technology is still in infancy, the time taken for that to convert into a kind of a stable platform, and a platform where customers will also have access to that kind of technology will take time. So most of the funding that you get in the initial phase will be used in R&D. You understand? It will be used in R&D. You will not be able to capitalize on that. You'll not be able to capitalize on the time. Whereas if you're on a more mature step, say you're in the stage of say 6, where technology has been properly tested, there is already a prototype. Because many a times when I see these startups come to me, I ask koi prototype hai. So prototype hai means somewhere or the other the technology has been tested. It is in physical form, it is not only on the drawing board. So the first thing that a promoter should be clear about is where does he lie on this scale. The TRL scale is something which I have not found in many of the startups, and this is grossly lacking. So this is something that as a promoter you should look into. Next, it is always better to have things in black and white. So this is something which lawyers usually insist on, that you should have a founders agreement. यानी कि ये दोस्ती यारी में company बना लो is not something that survives. So whatever dosti yari mein decide hoti hai na, write it down. Write it down, because you do not remember what you have committed on a phone call unless it is on WhatsApp or maybe in any other written form. Put it in form of an agreement which is called the founders agreement. Most of the promoters or the young startup generation do not want to put things in writing, but unless you put things in black and white, you will not understand as to where you should start and where you should stop, where you should go back and revisit, so on and so forth. Now, when you have decided as to what you will do, what would be your business, as a promoter you have to decide, or as a founder you have to decide, what will you retain with yourself and what you will delegate. Now this is a very very tricky situation. हमें लगता है मैं मालिक हूँ, सारा काम मेरे पास होना चाहिए और सारी authority मेरे पास होनी चाहिए. But the issue is, if you retain all the authority and all the decision making powers, you'll not be able to operate. कहीं ना कहीं आपको भरोसा रखना है लोगों पे. सो यू मस्ट बी वेरी क्लियर कि ये काम मेरे मुताबिक मेरे कैपेबिलिटी के बेसिस पे आई डू बेस्ट, hence I will do this, hence I will be the executive director, which means I'll be more involved in day to day management. On the other hand, there are people who are specialists, but they are not required on a day-to-day management basis, hence they can be non-executive. Because when you construct your board, there are two typical kind of varieties: the executive part and the non-executive. So kisko kya delegate karna hai, you should be very clear. Next, advisory board is something that we have learned from the Byju's episode. Now my proposition is, okay, why don't you create an advisory board, or at least talk to people and keep them on your good terms. होली दिवाली पे देते रहो गिफ्ट. कौन कह रहा है कि आप उनको एडवाइजरी बोर्ड पे ले आओ? You may foresee that आगे जाके I may need the help of this person, or a professor, or a banker, retired bureaucrat. Holi, Diwali, this is the best thing in India. कुछ ना कुछ गिफ्ट्स देते रहो and keep him in the loop के सर मैं ये कर रहा हूँ, ऐसे कर रहा हूँ. So that if something really goes wrong, अब हमारे यहाँ पे बायजूस में क्या हुआ? It was a post-mortem, right? Things went wrong and then they looked for people who could help the company revive. Why do it that way? We learn from our mistakes. So when you're creating the company, when you are the promoter, when you're going ahead with the plans, have an advisory board in place. If you don't want to spend money, at least list down the probable candidates who can help you when you are in a problematic situation, who will constitute the advisory boards. Trusteeship. अब आपको ये एक समझना है कि the moment funding comes in from other sources, आप मालिक नहीं हो. This is a typical concept of corporate law. So most of the times क्या होता है ना, people who are not typical lawyers or maybe even commerce graduates have seen कि मेरी कंपनी है. नहीं नहीं भैया, तुम्हारी कंपनी है as long as it is funded wholly by you. Good. Now, if there are investors who come in and invest in your company, you are not the owner, but you become a trustee. Trustee मतलब आपको उनका पैसा सही सलामत रखना है और उनके पैसे पे प्रॉफिट कमा के वापस करना है, मतलब आप चौकीदार बन जाते हो. If you ask me in typical terms, you are a gatekeeper. So you must be able to appreciate कि अगर मैंने borrowings की, अगर मैंने equity लिया, अगर मैंने private equity ली, so I am responsible to them. It is not my own money. I have seen in startups, private equity से पैसा आया, मालिक ने गाड़ी खरीद ली. He's buying a house. अरे भैया वो पैसा तुम्हारा नहीं है, इट इज कंपनीज मनी, हेंस यू ओनली एक्ट एज अ ट्रस्टी. सो द अर्लियर यू अंडरस्टैंड, द अर्लियर यू आर रेडी टू अंडरस्टैंड एंड रियलाइज कि मुझे ट्रस्टी बनना है, इट इज बेटर फॉर यू. अदरवाइज यही होगा, हर बार कोई पैसा आएगा, आप या तो फॉरेन घूमने चले जाओगे या नई गाड़ी खरीद लोगे, एंड एट द एंड ऑफ द डे यू विल नॉट हैव मनी फॉर द कंपनी. Principal agency problem. Now here what happens is you are hiring people, but please keep it in mind, as the owner you have certain different incentives and the employee has certain different incentives. You have to appreciate that. इसीलिए आप अगर एम्प्लॉय को एक्सेसिव टारगेट्स दे देते हो without giving him commensurate remuneration, he will never work for you. He will find out ways how to waste his time. So you have to understand that you are the owner, you're the principal, and the agent has to work in a different way, and his incentives are totally different. So automatically you have to keep on incentivizing him and get things done from him. So the better you understand your position and his position, better. हम क्या सोचते हैं मालिक, एक एम्प्लॉय को जाके बोलते हो, एक सेल्स के बंदे को बोलते हो, क्या आप कंपनी के तरक्की में कंट्रीब्यूट नहीं करना चाहते हो? अरे उसकी सैलरी कमीशन से आती है, कंपनी तरक्की कर ले. अगर कंपनी ने एक दूसरी ऑफिस खोल लिया, सोचो इन अ फॉरेन कंट्री, आर यू गोइंग टू सेंड योर एम्प्लॉइज एवरी मंथ टू दैट प्लेस? और जब उनकी समर वेकेशंस आएंगे, will you tell के go with your children and have a family holiday in our office in Netherlands? नहीं ना. नेदरलैंड्स में ऑफिस खुला है तो खुला है, उसमें आप एज अ प्रमोटर आपकी तरक्की हो रही है, वो सेल्स के बंदे को क्या मिल रहा है? कमीशन. सो यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड कि कंपनी की तरक्की मींस डज नॉट मीन दैट he will also be happy if a company is expanding. He will only be happy if his paycheck increases. So be aware of that. एंगेजमेंट एंड कम्युनिकेशन, बी ऑनेस्ट. अब आप देखोगे ना बायजूस, ठीक है, बायजूस में जब ये चीजें हो रही थी, देन रविंद्रन स्टार्टेड sending emails, he started sending WhatsApp, so on and so forth. So what was the where was the communication channel before things were before things blew out of proportion? You should always have an open communication channel, so that if there are things that are going wrong, you can communicate with people. ये नहीं कि छिपा लो और उसके बाद then you disclose it to people कि भाई हाँ बम फूट रहा है, फूट गया, now you take care of this situation. See, this creates a very bad impression. I have known students who don't want to join Byju's nowadays, but there was a time when people were ready to join Byju's because they were offering a very high salary. So this scenario, this negativity only arises when you try to conceal things. Now, this is how as a business owner, you should at least start approaching the issue of running your concern. Governance scenario. Now, again, the second most important part is law. Now, there are two kind of things that you must keep in mind. एक तो होती है कोडिफाइड लॉ, मतलब किसी सब्जेक्ट पे लॉ बन गई है, ठीक है. सो दिस इज अ बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ व्हाट कुड बी द कोडिफाइड लॉ. से in most of the startups, because of funding issues, unless you are a private limited company or an LLP, फंडिंग नहीं मिलती है. तो आपको यही दो ऑप्शंस है. यू कैन नॉट हैव अ HUF, यू कैन नॉट हैव अ सोल प्रोप्राइटरशिप फर्म. आपको यही दो सेटअप्स लेने. The baseline is that in law it is said they have perpetual succession. मतलब आप रहो ना रहो, it is like LIC, जिंदगी के साथ भी जिंदगी के बाद भी, which means if there is a loan against you, even when somebody dies, loan will exist. If there is a receivable, that will also exist, right? So this is a business entity setup. तो more or less ये तो codified है, ये दोनों जानिए. The other aspect is when you're talking of a typical इंडस्ट्री और सेक्टर, जैसे पेटीएम, राइट. पेटीएम एग्जांपल में क्या हुआ, आरबीआई ने बहुत से प्रॉब्लम्स क्रिएट कर दिए बिकॉज इट इज इनटू फिनटेक. So nowadays, as a startup or as somebody who's helping and working with startups, you should be very clear कि ये क्या है. ये जो टिपिकल बिजनेस सेटअप है, इज इट अ फिनटेक? अगर फिनटेक है तो देयर इज फिन एंड टेक, which means part of the typical law will come from the financial domain, part of the typical law will come from the technical domain, which is IT. So you must be very clear कि ये जो हमारा सेटअप है ये किस किस डोमेन को टच कर रहा है, because every domain may, I'll again use the word may, have a specific statute. Third, for every statute or every codified law there is a regulator. ठीक है, जैसे अगर हम बैंकिंग सेक्टर कहते हैं, बैंकिंग सेक्टर में सुप्रीम रेगुलेटर इज आरबीआई. इंश्योरेंस में यू हैव इंश्योरेंस रेगुलेटरी डेवलपमेंट अथॉरिटी, आईआरडीए, सिमिलरली सो ऑन एंड सो फोर्थ. सो आपको ये जानना बहुत जरूरी है कि चलो ये लॉ हुई, दिस इज अ सेक्टर स्पेसिफिक लॉ, अब इसको चलाता कौन है, विच इज व्हाट इज द इंटरफेस. ठीक है, यू डोंट एवरी टाइम यू हैव अ बैंकिंग इशू यू विल नॉट राइट टू निर्मला सीतारमन, मैडम मुझे ये बैंकिंग में प्रॉब्लम हो रही है. यू विल राइट टू आरबीआई गवर्नर. So the third most important aspect of law that you must understand is what is the public interface. And when you understand the public interface or the relevant regulator, you have to understand what are the basic rules and regulations. क्योंकि ये rules and regulations are not a part of the main law, but ये जो पब्लिक इंटरफेस में आरबीआई बैठा हुआ है, ट्राई बैठा हुआ है, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी बैठा हुआ है, इन मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ एनवायरनमेंट बैठा हुआ है, अपने ही जो जो प्रोसेसेस होते हैं उसके लिए दे मेक रूल्स एंड रेगुलेशंस. सो यू हैव टू बी in the loop of the basic rules and regulations that are being issued by these ministries. So we have an act which is supreme, then you have a sector specific law, then you have a regulator, and every regulator will have its own procedural rules and regulations. Next most important thing as a part of law is policy. Now देखिए ये policy कोई act नहीं है. Policy is something which is brought into maybe to deal with a typical situation. जैसे कोविड के बाद, अब कोविड के बाद क्या हुआ था, you will see a lot of incentives were allowed, many relaxations were given to many companies, MSMEs were given a lot of boost, so on and so forth. So policy भी सरकार की ही एक intent है, it is a codified intent, but it is not a typical act, it is something which is circumstantial in nature. So अगर आप सोचो startup बनाना चाहते हो, if you are not aware of what the policy is right now, is it something conducive to your startup idea, is it something which is not very clear, if you're not very aware of the policy you'll not be able to capitalize on. Next, as policy decisions, I told you what are the various policy decisions. Next most important source or next most important thing is subsidy. See, her policy, you have to understand what is a policy. Policy is something which is giving you a push. ठीक है, you need some kind of a extra comfort. तो सरकार कहती है मैं हूं आपके पीछे. I can't pass a law because laws cannot be made for every circumstances. Economy will go up, you have a law for that. Economy will come down, you have a law for that. No, laws are static. But in order to deal with these fluctuations, you have the intent of the government in form of policy. So उन policies के तहत होता क्या है, एक तो आपको काफी सारी रियायतें दी जाती है, which is relaxations. The other part of a policy is subsidy. Now subsidy, most of us don't understand, is a source of funding. We are all aware of the saying that a penny saved is a penny earned, right? When you save 1 rupee, you are earning 1 rupee in a way. Subsidies are like that. अगर आप अपनी प्लांट सेटअप करते हो इस जगह, तो आपको लैंड रेवेन्यू नहीं देना होगा. You get subsidies on electricity. You get a lot of subsidies. Look out for those subsidies, because those subsidies, even if they are there for one time, or even if they are for 5 years, पैसा तो बच रहा है ना. So that is a way wherein you can bring down your ask for funding, maybe from an incubator or a bank. कि मुझे अगर 30% subsidy मिल ही रही है, I do not need 100%, I only need 70%, right? So subsidies will come out of the policies which are again a part of the legal framework. So there is a misunderstanding that law does not facilitate business. law always facilitates business, because try and understand, अगर धंधा ही नहीं रहा तो law अकेले क्या कर लेगा? We have so many laws. We are talking on Manupatra. I have lawyers in here. But just think, कल अगर रिलायंस यहां से बोरिया बिस्तर बांध के चली जाती, how many lawyers, company secretaries, management professional will go out of employment? Yes or no? So dhanda comes first, business comes first. Yes, in order to regulate the business, we have laws. So never think that law impedes business. No, law always facilitates business. It is only you need to understand the law, you need to interpret the law, you need to utilize the law. I think I have a question. I'll take it when we are quickly done with the session. So I've just given you an example of some dairy entrepreneurship scheme to tell you how policy and subsidy looks like. Now the question comes कि अगर कोई law है ही नहीं, if there are no laws as such, questions are coming and I'll take it up later. ठीक है? So अब सोचो कि ऐसा आपको कुछ करना चाह रहे हो जिसमें कोई लॉ नहीं है. Very recently I came across a kind of a startup idea where they were trying to do something with animal fodder. तो मैंने पूछा कि ऐसा है कि ह्यूमन कंजम्पशन के लिए जो फूड बनता है दैट तो इज कवर्ड अंडर एफएसएसआई, ये एनिमल फॉडर है. अब you have to understand, I think Sparsh, if you can stop cribbling, it will be easier. Already एक लाइन आ चुकी है, so don't increase the lights, right? I'll not be able to see these lights. ये एक blue mark तक ठीक है. Okay, now coming back, if you do not have a specific law, तो क्या हम धंधा बंद कर दें? Like this guy wanted funding from us, and he was saying कि we are doing something which with animal fodder. और अगर हमने ये animal fodder बना ली, so the output would be that the animals will give more milk, or they'll be more healthier, so on and so forth. So my question was that if you are creating something for animals, they are eating it, और वो जो एनिमल का आउटपुट है, से मिल्क इन केस ऑफ अ काउ और डेयरी, वो मिल्क कौन कंज्यूम कर रहे हैं? मैं और आप. So in a way, whatever you are doing at a nascent stage in the food chain is going to enter human beings, right? So I'll be very very aware of what kind of food my cattle is eating, because I am the buyer of the milk. So I have to understand कि वो जो आप food बना रहे हो, animal feed बना रहे हो, is it safe? Is it going to help the animal increase the production, but not at the cost of something else? है ना कि चलो the output is increasing, but at the same time there are certain health hazards. So unfortunately, he said that we are trying to get a certification from a US agency, so on and so forth. But what happens is, getting a certification from an international agency is okay, but there are certain critical issues wherein an international certification standalone will not help you. India में कुछ है, like say TRL जो हमने देखा ना, you also have to see whether the legal framework supports your business idea, your concept. Now, if there are certain things wherein there is no law, but there is a draft bill, or there is a draft which is pending in the parliament, or there is work being done. आपको पता है कि अगले 6 महीने में या अगले पार्लियामेंट सेशन में ये लॉ बन जानी है, तो क्या आप 6 महीने वेट करोगे? नो ना. सी अपॉर्चुनिटी एक ही बार. सो you get into a contract. So when you're making typical contracts wherein there is no legal framework, you take care of certain basic principles. Now, basic principles first would be bona fide, which means कि आप कुछ भी काम करो, आपको ये देखना है that you're not taking undue advantage of a situation. आप किसी गरीब के साथ, या फिर you're not taking undue advantage of a situation in the economy. You're not doing anything wrong. So that is called bona fide. Now, why bona fide? मैं मान लेता हूं कि आज के डेट पे कोई लॉ नहीं है, बट कल के डेट पे अगर किसी ने आपकी जो ये बिजनेस वेंचर है उसको डिस्प्यूट किया, if somebody accuses you of something wrong, then based on the bona fide principle through which you have entered into a contract, based on your good intentions, based on your best endeavors, you can establish that, look, I had tried my best. So somewhere or the other, law will favor you. Law will favor you. Similarly, you look at the public interest. If the kind of a venture that you're doing is going to really, really solve a major public issue, the public interest is involved, wherein you are going to contribute. But unfortunately, though, there is no existing legal statute on it. You can go ahead with it, provided you take care of the public interest. Similarly, in civil laws, we talk of something that is called the pigeonhole theory, which means अगर आप देखोगे ना ये जितने भी कबूतर होते हैं, in olden days obviously they would have a house. तो हर कबूतर को पता था कि ये मेरा घर है, and they'll not usually go into other people's house. I mean the other pigeons' house. They will fly back and get into the typical house to which they have been designated. So even in law, it says that if there is a typical wrong that has already been codified, you can only be held responsible for that wrong. ये नहीं कि हवा में कुछ भी हो रही है, दुनिया में कुछ भी गलत हो रहा है और उसके लिए आपको जिम्मेदार ठहराया जाएगा. No. So, you have to understand that there are areas where there are no typical rules or laws existing as on date. These areas could be handled with a proper negotiation. These could be handled with a proper contract wherein a law is still in making without losing the business opportunity. Right. Okay. How to draft a contract? See, drafting a contract is a huge area. But just for a layman, what happens is in India, or it's a basic fact that we are too prone to formats. Try not to copy a format, because what happens is, there can be a structure. In every agreement, there's a structure. You start, these are the parties, this is the date. A structure is okay, but try not to, take the paragraphs that has been drafted for somebody else, because it does not convey what you want to say. So try as a startup founder or somebody who's dealing with a startup, try to write down facts the way you speak, as simple as that. See, you write down what you feel, you write down what you speak in a piece of paper, take it to a lawyer. He may redraft it in his own way, but do not try to adapt something that is already there in existence, right? Already एक drafted है, हाँ ये अंग्रेजी बहुत अच्छी लग रही है भाई, कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा, ले लेते हैं. But problem is, the moment you take it into your main document, you will not be able to substantiate later on if there is a dispute. So drafting also should be skillfully done, and it should have some kind of attributes. One of the most important things that I would like to highlight here is always revive your contracts way before the expiry date, because I've seen it in India. I've seen it कि लास्ट डेट को ना वो अपने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स फिर जाते हैं रिन्यू करने, and by that time they lose out on better opportunities, they may lose out on some licenses. So always maintain a calendar that if a contract is going to expire 3 months from now, start looking at the renewal options. क्योंकि why don't you see, जिसके साथ आपने पिछले साल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट किया है, अगर वो 10 रुपए में कोई सामान दे रहा है, हो सकता है इस साल कोई और आपको वेंडर मिल जाए जो 5 रुपए में देने के लिए तैयार हो. बट अगर आप लास्ट डे पे आ जाओगे तो यू नॉट हैव द लिबर्टी और द option of looking into the other vendors. So always keep a tab on the contracts that you have. Furthermore, all contracts, because they are on behalf of the LLP or the private company, must be approved in a proper way at the board meeting or at the meeting of the designated partners. Further on, ये जो contract sign करते हैं, किसी से भी साइन मत करवा लेना, because in most of the cases you will see somebody who signs the contract may not be authorized. अरे MD साहब है, चलो करवा लो, अरे वो तो मालिक का बेटा है, करवा लो. For his signature and making that contract valid, he should be properly delegated the power to sign. Some basic contracts, shareholders agreement, term sheet, vendors agreement, ये तो करना ही करना है. The only thing I would like to highlight here is the term sheet. Many of us think term sheet is sacrosanct. No, term sheet is just a letter of intent or a memorandum of understanding, which means it is just the draft. इट इज जस्ट द ड्राफ्ट कि हमें आगे जाके कॉन्ट्रैक्ट जब बनानी है क्या क्या करनी है. सो यू नो आई हैव सीन मेनी पीपल गेटिंग स्केर्ड. आई हैव सीन मेनी ऑफ द स्टार्टअप्स जब वो टर्म शीट साइन कर लेते हैं ना किसी बैंक के साथ या फिर किसी एजेंसी के साथ, दे थिंक ओ माय गॉड वी कैन नॉट रीनेगोशिएट. You can renegotiate, Baba. The term sheet is only giving you directions. It is nowhere binding on you. You cannot sue anybody based on the term sheet. It is only when you enter into a contract, then it is a legally binding document. So term sheet may you can have variations. Please keep that in mind. And term sheet is the basic agreement that you enter into, and then it goes into a typical contract. So shareholders agreement, जब आप नए लोगों को लाते हो पैसा लेते हो, vendors agreement में you should be very clear about the kind of data which share with your vendors. You know, you get into a AMC. अब AMC तो दे दिया, वो आके आपके कंप्यूटर्स और सब कुछ सर्विस तो कर रहे हैं, बट ही और शी इज हैविंग एक्सेस टू योर डेटा. उस डेटा प्राइवेसी का कैसे डील करोगे इज अ मेजर इशू इन वेंडर्स एग्रीमेंट which a standard agreement may not have. So be very careful when you are engaging vendors who have access to data. What could be the liability if there is a data breach is something that you must mention. Risk mitigation, insurance. Again, this is one area which I don't see because kya hota hai, you know, when you create your business plan, you talk of a lot of things, but you don't talk of insurance. Kya aapko ek धंधा करने के लिए, you know, there will be risk. We think fire, burglary, ये सब तो होगा ही. The moment you have a business, there will be issues. So how do you deal with these insurances uh, or risks? So you must always have the criteria of insurance built into your business plan. How much premium are you going to give? What is the insurance policy that you will take? You must factor in. क्योंकि बिना इंश्योरेंस के धंधा नहीं होता है. But just try and recall how many pitch decks have you found in life which talk of a typical insurance कि नहीं हम तो इसके लिए ये इंश्योरेंस ले रहे हैं, इसके लिए वो इंश्योरेंस ले रहे हैं. Now insurance has also certain basic cardinal rules, which means say for instance it is an agreement, right? So both the insured and insurer should not hide something from them. Then there should be insurable interest, which means if I am taking an insurance on something, I should be grossly impacted by the existence or the non-existence of the subject matter. अगर वो रहा तो वो मेरे benefit में होगा, अगर वो नहीं है तो मेरे लिए नुकसान होगा. So I cannot insure anything which has no relation to me. Similarly, indemnity means आपको इंश्योरेंस में कभी कोई प्रॉफिट नहीं होना है. मतलब अगर आपके पास 100 रुपए का स्टॉक है, आपने 100 रुपए इंश्योर कर रखे हैं और उसमें 70 रुपए का नुकसान हुआ है, यू कांट गो एंड से सर मैंने तो 100 रुपए का लिया हुआ है इंश्योरेंस, मुझे 100 रुपए दे दो ना, मेरा नुकसान हुआ है 70, उससे आपको क्या लेना देना. नो, इंश्योरेंस कंपनी विल ओनली गिव यू टू द एक्सटेंट ऑफ लॉस, विच मीन्स 70 रुपए. आप मुनाफा नहीं कर सकते हो इंश्योरेंस में. ड्यू केयर, अरे मैंने इंश्योरेंस ले ली है भाई, फायर इंश्योरेंस, कोई बात नहीं, आज हम यहीं पे दिवाली मनाते हैं, अपने फैक्ट्री में ही दिवाली मनाओ, वहीं बम फोड़ो, क्यों आया फायर इंश्योरेंस. You can't be so negligent. You have to take due care. And lastly, most important principle is, you know, when there are multiple reasons. Say for instance, आप किसी के फैक्ट्री में आग लग गई, जैसे ही फैक्ट्री में आग लग गई, वो आया और उसने सारा सामान जो है फैक्ट्री से निकाल के बाहर रख दिया कि भैया यहाँ तो है, लेट दी फायर ब्रिगेड डू इट्स जॉब, मैं अपना सारा सामान जो जला नहीं है बाहर रख देता हूँ. अनफॉर्चुनेटली फायर ब्रिगेड वहां से गई, बारिश शुरू हो गई और जितना सामान उसने फैक्ट्री से उठा के बाहर रखा बारिश में खराब हो गया. नाउ द क्वेश्चन अराइजेस व्हेन ही गोस टू द इंश्योरेंस कंपनी एंड सेज कि मेरा तो सामान खराब हो गया. इंश्योरेंस कंपनी विल आस्क कि बताओ जी आपके पास इंश्योरेंस किसका था. आप बोलोगे फायर, बट जो सामान खराब हुआ है वो आग से नहीं, बाहर बारिश में रखी हुई थी इसलिए खराब हुई. Hence, this is called the principle of causa proxima, which means how close the reason of actual loss is to the इंश्योरेंस कवरेज. इसीलिए हम कहते हैं इंश्योरेंस वाले ना बहुत खराब है, उन्होंने क्लेम ही नहीं दिया. अरे भाई क्यों देंगे, योर कवरेज वाज फॉर फायर, it was not for the loss that would occur due to natural rain, right? So these are certain policies that you must have. One most important policy that you must have today is fidelity guarantee policy, which means You insure your company against the action of your employees. If you remember in the very first dilemma, agent principal relationship, देखो एम्प्लॉइज कब पलट जाए, उसको कब कौन कहां से एक्स्ट्रा इंसेंटिव मिल जाए, वह और आजकल वो क्या था, मून वॉकिंग शुरू कर दे, यू कैंट स्टॉप हिम, you can't stop it. Hence, as a business owner or as a funding agency, you must always insist कि बाकी सब physical factors तो है, property, cash, contract, ये सब तो है, बट ह्यूमन नेचर को भी आप इंश्योर कर सकते हो, बिल्कुल कर सकते हो. दी प्रोबेबिलिटी ऑफ लॉस दैट में अकर ड्यू टू ह्यूमन नेचर इज कवर्ड अंडर फिdelity गारंटी पॉलिसी. इंश्योरेंस. Now, on the other hand, अभी तक हमने जो इंश्योरेंसेस देखे हैं वो है एज अ ओनर I go and procure based on my requirement, right? But there is one more thing, that there are certain insurance products which the government mandates. Now, please keep it in mind, जैसे workman compensation सबके लिए नहीं है. आई थिंक इफ आई रिकॉल करेक्टली, अगर आप किसी को 15,000 से ऊपर सैलरी दे रहे हो, या फिर इफ यू फॉल इनटू द डेफिनेशन ऑफ अ फैक्ट्री, लाइक से 10 लोग विदाउट विथ पावर, 20 लोग विदाउट पावर, ऐसे कॉम्बिनेशन में आपकी सेटअप चल रही है, देन ओनली दिस लॉ विल अप्लाई टू यू. सो देर आर सर्टेन लॉज which are in the nature of insurance. Insurance में क्यों कह रहा हूं, क्योंकि इसमें employer, that is you as a startup, has to contribute, government will also contribute, और ये पैसा आपको किसी घटना के बाद मिलती है. On the other hand, if you see, there is a law called Public Liability Act, which is also kind of an insurance, wherein nothing has to occur. It is the inherent nature of your business. If you're dealing with hazardous substances, from day one, whether you employ one person, whether you pay 15,000 or 50 lakh, you have to take this insurance. So insurance is a very, very important component. One is the risk handling, wherein you take policies and you can handle them on your own based on your capability and payment potential. The other is mandatory aspects of insurance, wherein government कह देती है कि भैया अगर धंधा करना है, ये policies तो लेना ही है आपको. Manpower. Now, manpower planning is also very important. You know, you don't hire permanent employees. आजकल के date पे, you know, most of the jobs are done by contractual employees. See, if a contractual employee is ready to work for 8 hours and give you the output, why should I create a full-time liability? I'll give you a very good example. ये आपने lateral entry का concept सुना होगा, या फिर ये जो अग्निवीर चला पड़ा है, right, in the Indian Army. What are these? These are short-term services. So in these short-term services, please try and understand, it is not going to exert so much of pressure on the government exchequer, but at the same time, the jobs will be done. So when you are hiring manpower, be very, very careful that you understand the need. क्या मुझे full time employees चाहिए, क्या मुझे part time से काम करवा लेना है, क्या मुझे commission based employee चाहिए, कि मुझे बस sales ही sales करानी है, तो मैं full time क्यों, जितना सेल उतना पैसा ले लो, celebrity based sales. Similarly, casual employees आप ले सकते हो, you can have apprenticeship. Now there is a difference between casual employees and apprentices. The apprentice is a kind of a legal binding, and there's a law on it. There's an apprentice act. A casual employee may be bound by the basic contract that you execute with him. उसके साथ जितना आपने लिखा पढ़ी कर ली, उतना ही हो गया उसके साथ. बट अप्रेंटिस अगर आप किसी को लिख के देते हो ना, जैसे मोस्ट ऑफ द टाइम्स हम ना ये 3-4 वर्ड्स देखते नहीं, अप्रेंटिस रख लो, अप्रेंटिस रख लो. अरे भाई, अप्रेंटिस, ट्रेनी, ये सब वर्ड्स नो एक एक टिपिकल टेक्निकल कनोटेशन लाती है. इसके चलते देर आर सर्टेन लॉज दैट मे बी ट्रिगर्ड ऑफ. अगर कोई अप्रेंटिस चाहे, he can bring legal action against you, but a casual employee may not, because all he has is a contract. Now you have to be very careful that what kind of people you hire. Similarly, a person who's on probation. Now probation means he's already on your rolls. Please keep that in mind. ठीक है, he may be part time or full time, but he's on probation, which means कि कुछ दिनों के बाद you will confirm him. So even with manpower hiring, when you're structuring the human resource department, you have to be very careful कि मुझे किस तरीके के लोग चाहिए. You don't have to hire everybody full time, or you don't have to hire everybody part time. You have to understand the utility and then hire the person. Now, just to update you, on 20th of June this month, the ministry is again meeting to talk on the labor codes. तो अभी तक क्या कहानी थी कि we had different laws, remuneration act, industrial development act, इतने सारे laws. Now, what will happen, I think, because this has already been, approved by many states. तो ये जो laws हैं, they have been consolidated. Now, there will be no typical laws as such, there would be typical code. So, one code will refer to the wage, the other would be industrial relation, the other would be social security. So, जितने भी ना मिलते जुलते भाई बहन वाले कोड है, सारे भाई बहन एक ही परिवार में आ जाएंगे. So, सारे financial जो laws थे, they will go into wage. Whatever was related to, say, social security, like I told you, workman compensation, they will go into, say, social security. Hence, today when you are hiring people, आज के डेट पे 20 तारीख ज्यादा दूर नहीं है, राइट? आज के डेट पे जब आप हायरिंग कर रहे हो, यू शुड बी अवेयर ऑफ दीज कोड्स, और आई वुड सजेस्ट यू हायर a lawyer or you hire a labor law consultant who is aware of these codes. क्योंकि अभी तक तो हमने इसको लटका के रखा था कि कल होगा परसों होगा, but I'm sure with the government coming back, this is one unfinished agenda that they will try to fulfill. And please keep it in mind, with passage of time, the 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 ambit of law has increased. So there was a time that the industries which were in hazardous operations were not covered, but now with global standards coming in, these labor codes have become very very useful. And you as an employer, you as a banker, you as an incubator must be aware of the codes. और 20 जून के बाद हो सकता है ये सारे applicable हो जाए. Fourth, ESG. ESG एक fashion में हो गया. Now I remember 2 months back I went to, I'll not name the town. I told them कि ESG पे एक conference कराते हैं, and our target was MSME. So a very learned person, he's a very senior person. He said, "Sir, MSME आपको इतना नहीं पता है कि ESG जो है, it is applicable to listed companies." मैंने कहा, हाँ सर, बिल्कुल पता है. But the problem is we only know that BRSR, that is business responsibility, sustainability, this reporting, that reporting, is applicable to top 1,000 listed companies. But the issue is the devil lies in the details. अगर आप लिस्टेड कंपनी की ये जो BRSR फॉर्मेट है, इवन इफ यू आर नॉट अ लिस्टेड कंपनी, इट विल स्टिल इम्पैक्ट यू एज अ स्टार्टअप. व्हाई? If you download the report, in the report there are many affirmative questions that are being asked to the main entity. Now, just to give you a brief, सोचो मारुति उद्योग लिमिटेड. अब मारुति उद्योग लिमिटेड इज अ लिस्टेड कंपनी, उस पे BRSR एप्लीकेबल है, हाँ जी. बट उसके BRSR में अंडर वेरियस क्वेश्चंस इट इज आस्क्ड, नंबर वन, कि आप सस्टेनेबल सोर्सिंग करते हो. अब मारुति उद्योग लिमिटेड स्टीयरिंग, बॉल बेयरिंग, टायर, शीशे तो बनाती नहीं है. इट इज सोर्स्ड फ्रॉम वेयर? MSMEs. Or it may be sourced from where? Startups like you. So when the Maruti is preparing the BRSR report, he has to answer whether the sourcing is done from a sustainable company or not. So वो sustainable company कौन है? आपको. Similarly, under social aspects, it talks of the new labor codes, whether people in the value chain. Now, just to give you the definition of a value chain, I think any entity which is, say, related to the main listed entity to the proportion of 75%. मतलब आप एक स्टार्टअप हो, आपका 75% सेल इज गोइंग टू मारुति उद्योग लिमिटेड, सो आप वैल्यू चेन पार्टनर बन गए. तो BRSR रिपोर्ट ऑफ मारुति उद्योग में क्वेश्चन आएगा, क्या स्टार्टअप से जो आपका 75% कॉन्ट्रीब्यूट करता है, वो उसने सारे लेबर कोड अप्लाई किया है? So you understand, there is no mandate from the MSME ministry. There is no mandate from, no direct mandate from the Ministry of Corporate Affairs on ESG compliance. But कभी आप टाइम निकालो और BRSR को पढ़ो. Entire BRSR is talking of value chain, or value chain partner means you and MSMEs. Hence, E, S, and G is also an integral part. प्रोडक्ट सर्टिफिकेशंस एंड बेंचमार्किंग, आई जस्ट वांटेड टू हाईलाइट दिस कि ब्लिंकिट का थैला, बहुत ही गंदा एक थैला आता है आप लोगों के घर। कभी आप अगर नोटिस करोगे से थैला पलटना और थैले के नीचे ना, यू सी दिस ग्रीन मार्क, इट सेज FSC, Forest Stewardship Council. Now, when I talk of the ESG compliances, in order to get ESG compliant, आपको ये जो benchmarking है लेनी पड़ जाएगी. So even as a startup, in startups, I have never seen a slide on ESG compliance. मैं बोलते बोलते थक गया. I have worked with some startup founders also कि बेटा जी ESG पे भी कुछ बना दो. सर ESG तो हम पे एप्लीकेबल ही नहीं है, और आप ESG की बात कर रहे हो, हमें कुछ पैसे तो लेने दो, फिर हम देखेंगे ना. But try and understand, in from day one, if you do not have a ESG plan in place, आपको seed funding भी नहीं मिलेगी. Go and ask your banker friends. उनसे पूछो कि टुडे आरबीआई हैज आल्सो मैंडेटेड कि जहां आप पैसा डाल रहे हो, चाहे वो स्टार्टअप हो, विजय माल्या हो या कोई और माल्या हो, यू हैव टू सी वेदर द एंटिटी इज ESG compliant. So as a startup, if you are not ESG compliant, if you are not following basic benchmarking, पैसा नहीं आएगा. आया तो बहुत मुश्किल से आएगा. That's the reason ESG is necessary. IPR, not going into the depth because I'm not an IPR expert, but IPR works both ways. एक तो हमें ना, मैंने देखा है सर, हमने ये ना प्रोटोटाइप बना लिया एंड दिस इज द टेक्नोलॉजी, और हमने ना IPR के लिए अप्लाई कर दिया एंड वी आर गेटिंग इट पेटेंटेड. ठीक है जी. नाउ आई आस्क देम कि आप अपना जो बना रहे हो उसके लिए तो पेटेंट करवा रहे हो. सो when you made this technology or when you made this platform, सोचिए कोई प्लेटफॉर्म है, उन्होंने कोई ऐप बनाई. नाउ आई आस्क देम कि आपने ऐप बनाया, उसके लिए तो पेटेंट के लिए अप्लाई किया बिकॉज यू वांट टू safeguard your own interest. Very good, very good. Now in order to make this app, have you used some kind of tools? Yes, we have used Microsoft का this tool, we have used this tool, you have used that tool. Now my question arises कि भाई आपने जो tool use किया in making your own app, are you sure that the tool allows you to use it for the purpose you are making it? Like say for instance, सोचो in many of the एकेडमिक आर्टिकल्स, ठीक है, जब आप एकेडमिक आर्टिकल्स लेते हो उसमें साफ लिखा हुआ रहता है कि यू नीड स्पेसिफिक परमिशन फ्रॉम द ऑथर इफ यू आर गोइंग टू यूज इट फॉर अ कमर्शियल पर्पस, बट इफ यू वांट टू यूज इट फॉर एकेडमिक पर्पस, यू आर फ्री टू डू इट. सो माय क्वेश्चन टू दैट पर्सन वाज कि आपने जो टूल्स यूज किए हैं फॉर मेकिंग योर ऐप, does the service provider of that tool allow you to do it, या फिर आपको उनसे कुछ परमिशन लेनी थी? ऐसा तो नहीं है कि आप अपना पेटेंट ले लेते हो, आपको पेटेंट मिल जाती है, बाद में पता चलता है कि आपने किसी और की पेटेंट वायलेट कर ली. यू अंडरस्टैंड द सिचुएशन? आपने तो दूसरों का जोड़ जाड़ के अपना ऐप बना लिया, यू आर रेडी टू लॉन्च, आपके पास पेटेंट है, आप मालिक बन गए 20 साल के लिए, वाओ. बट in that wow process you have violated maybe some kind of a copyright or a trademark or any kind of a IPR of the other person. So when it comes to designing these kind of technologies, be very careful whether you are violating the IPR of the other person. Then use it for your own technology and then get it patented. हम उल्टा करते हैं, हम अपना पहले देखते हैं. अरे भाई अपने को देखो, but be very careful whether you are violating anything from the other end or not. Funding, equity है, debt है, private equity है, venture capital है, but one thing that I would like to highlight is, everybody runs after equity. Most of us of you are conscious investors and conscious participants, so कि equity मतलब control. इसीलिए लोग इक्विटी के पीछे भागते हैं ना. अदरवाइज यू कुड हैव प्रेफरेंशियल्स, जिसमें क्या होती है कि भैया अगर डिविडेंड मिल रहा है तो थोड़ा ज्यादा मिलेगा, या फिर यू कैन हैव बोरोइंग्स. बट इक्विटी इसलिए भी दिया जाता है क्योंकि इक्विटी विल गिव यू सम वोटिंग राइट्स, इट विल गिव यू कंट्रोल, इट विल गिव यू मोर एंड मोर एक्सेस टू द कंपनी अफेयर्स. इसीलिए चाहे वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट हो, प्राइवेट इक्विटी हो, दोनों जाते हैं. बट जस्ट टू टेल यू दैट वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट जो है वो एकदम इन्फेंट स्टेज में आते हैं. वेंचर एडवेंचर से वेंचर, मतलब वो ना इन्वेस्टमेंट को भी एडवेंचर के हिसाब से लेते, चलो भैया डाल के देखते, डूब गया तो डूब गया, मिल गया तो मिल गया. On the other hand, private equity is a more standardized operation. They come when you are more stabilized. And obviously, you have an avenue of crowdfunding also, which is not that prevalent in typical startups. But I've seen medical startups, crowdfunding is a very good avenue. Borrowing can be from angel investor. Ratan Tata se paise le lo. If Ratan Tata is giving you money, he will also give you some kind of good advice. So I would always suggest, I suggest this to all my startups and angel investors. All the incubators rather. एक एंजल इन्वेस्टर ले लो. सी पैसा हमेशा इंपॉर्टेंट नहीं होता है. It is the advice that you get from maybe a person like Ratan Tata that will save your company. Uh, Borrowing. Now, borrowing में there could be failures. Please keep it in mind कि अगर आपने borrow किया है with the business going up and down, you may or may not be able to repay. But every failure in repaying is not a crime. टिपिकल सर्कमस्टेंसेस में व्हाट विल हैपन, आपकी सिविल रेटिंग थोड़ा सा नीचे जाएगा, अगली बार लोन लेने में डिफिकल्टी आ जाएगी, बट दैट इज ओके, दैट इज अ प्रोसीड्यूरल लैप्स, क्योंकि एक बिजनेस में देयर विल बी इश्यूज व्हेन द मार्केट इज नॉट वर्किंग प्रॉपर्ली. दैट्स द रीजन कोविड में आपने देखा होगा दैट इन मोस्ट ऑफ द बैंक्स दे हैड एक्सटेंडेड द लोन रीपेमेंट पीरियड. बट ऑन द अदर हैंड, डोंट बिकम विजय माल्या. The second one is willful defaulter, which is Vijay Mallya category. पैसा है, पैसा लिया, you use the money for other purposes and you're not giving it back. In the earlier one, when you're defaulting loan, your credit score may go down, but it is not a criminal offense. You will not be prosecuted, you will not be put behind bars. But please keep it in mind, the moment you become a willful defaulter, when you are misusing the funds that are being given to you by the bank, then as per RBI, you are susceptible to criminal prosecution. Jail jaoge, idhar jaoge, udhar jaoge. It is not open to a civil jurisdiction. So you must be very careful as to पैसा नहीं दे पाना एक अलग बात है, बट पैसा क्यों नहीं दे पा रहे हो, दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. अगर आपने इंटेंशनली और आपके एक्शंस ऐसे थे विच सब्सटैंशिएट्स दैट यू हैव मिसयूज्ड द फंड्स, देन यू आर अ विलफुल डिफॉल्टर. मतलब जानबूझ के पैसा नहीं दे रहे हो, you become another Vijay Mallya. I don't think nobody wants to become like that. On the other hand, normal failure to repay is not a criminal offense. Bhag mat jana, matlab, you don't try to hide things. You should go to the bank, you should go to the funding agency and disclose things. There are ways and means of re-engineering the loan. Restructuring, the last topic. As a lawyer, most of us, the moment we talk of law, restructuring, the first thing that comes to our mind is M&A, right? Yahi hota hai na, merger and acquisitions, because this is how restructuring is typically defined, maybe in income tax law and in Companies Act. But restructuring over the period of time has been used as a word for business convenience. But restructuring, most of the times what we see is the restructuring ke naam pe, they downsize the size of the business, or they simply lay off the employees. So I've just given you some examples here कि 20-20 हजार लोगों को restructuring के नाम पे Ola, Uber, Byju's, they are doing away with the employees. So restructuring no longer means the typical M&A. Restructuring could also be simple actions like say turnaround restructuring. मतलब आपने अपने जो business के सोचो, you have 100 outlets, because you find the rentals are too high, you shut down 50. इसके लिए you don't have to go to National Company Law Tribunal, file a merger petition. It is a business decision, but it is still a restructuring concept. You may restructure your capital, debt, equity की जो concepts है उसको आप change कर लेते हो. However, restructuring still at the maximum extent involves disinvestment, wherein you demerge one of your entities, or it could be a merger, or where you diversify and amalgamate with companies, like I've given you the examples. ठीक है, तो restructuring typically should not be only restricted to the legal connotation, but also the business connotation. Lastly, हमारे पास एक लिस्ट होनी चाहिए, राइट? सी एट द एंड ऑफ द डे वी हैव दिस के पढ़ाई लिखाई बहुत की कि एट द एंड ऑफ द डे इफ यू आर नॉट गुड स्कोरर एंड यू टेल योर पेरेंट्स कि पापा मैंने बहुत पढ़ाई की, दिन में 8 8 घंटे में पढ़ता रहा, बट व्हेन यू डोंट गेट गुड मार्क्स ही से के बस क्या ही पढ़ रहे। सो यू नीड a checklist. You need a kind of a scorecard. You need a report card against which you can pitch your situation, or you can plot your situation and find out कि where do you stand, कि भैया whether I clear, whether I'm getting 90%, 60%, so on and so forth. So first, to sum up, corporate governance कोई नई प्रजाति की चिड़िया नहीं है, right? It is the same apna kaua kabutar and all these things that you see around you. It is the assimilation of certain things put in a right way. So the misunderstanding after after Byju's, or the misunderstanding that has been created by media is corporate governance ना कोई नई चीज आई है. It is the new tiger balm. लगाते ही दर्द दूध हो जाएगी, कुछ नहीं होता. Corporate governance is nothing but the typical compliance or typical consciousness of basic performances and basic duties. Now I've just enlisted them here. See, tone at the top, हमने देखा फाउंडर जो है वो अगर अपनी ड्यूटीज ठीक ठाक समझ ले, लीडरशिप टीम मतलब अपने बोर्ड मेंबर्स कैसे ला रहे हो, क्या कर रहे हो, बोर्ड अगर एक प्रॉपर डिसीजन ले, नॉट इन फेवर ऑफ द चेयरमैन बट इन फेवर ऑफ द बिजनेस, इट वर्क्स. ट्रस्टीशिप, आई टोल्ड यू, मालिक को समझना होगा कि जैसे ही बाहर से पैसा आ रहा है, ही इज ओनली अ कस्टोडियन. वो चौकीदार कह लो और इंग्लिश में गेट कीपर कह लो, दैट इज हाउ ही हैज टू वर्क. फाइनेंशियल प्रूडेंस, पैसा लिया, लोन लोगे या इक्विटी लोगे, बट जो भी लोगे इट हैज टू बी इन्वेस्टेड इन द कंपनी. इंटरनल कंट्रोल्स, रेगुलेटरी कॉन्शियसनेस, तभी आप रेगुलेटरी कॉन्शियसनेस को, आई मीन यू विल बी ओनली कॉन्शियस ऑफ द रेगुलेटरी डोमेन when you understand which sector applies to. Like I said, fintech, right? नाम में ही लिखा हुआ है, फिन मतलब फाइनेंस, टेक मतलब टेक. सो यू विल हैव एप्लीकेबिलिटी ऑफ आईटी लॉ एंड ऑब्वियसली फाइनेंशियल लॉस. व्हेन यू नो आईटी लॉ, अब आप देखो कि आईटी की रेगुलेटरी मिनिस्ट्री कौन सी है. आईटी लॉ के मिनिस्ट्री में जो है MEITY, मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी, दैट इज द मिनिस्ट्री. उसमें लॉग इन कर लो, देख लो भैया लेटेस्ट रेगुलेशंस क्या है. Latest regulation, when you know now, when you it is like, at times when you give a student a open book examination, I've seen open book में ना students ज्यादा खराब कर लेते क्योंकि वो इतने पेजेस पलट के ना ढूंढ ही नहीं पाते आंसर्स. So when you know के आंसर कहाँ लिखा हुआ है, I think open book exams are not required. Similarly here, when you know the macro structure कि मुझे कहाँ कहाँ जाना है और क्या क्या करना है, you will miss out. I am again reinforcing कि there are things that you will miss out, but वो है ना bona fide public interest. You can establish, देखो कि to the best extent I thought कि these are the laws applicable to me, because violations are of two kinds. One is procedural, the other is with intent. Procedural violations, even in Companies Act, I am sure most of the lawyer friends that have joined in know that most of the procedural violations are now kind of handled with compensation or kind of penalties, right? So अगर आप procedural violation करते हो, you can get away with it. It is not sacrosanct कि हर किसी को हर चीज पता लगेगी. And lastly, when you put everything in place, then only you can say you are ESG compliant. So इसीलिए ना most of the time हम पहले तो लिख देते हैं we are ESG compliant, but अंदर जाके देखो they are non-compliant on every aspect. Unless you are compliant on most of the major macro issues that are listed from 1 to 9, you cannot claim that you are ESG compliant. Lastly, how do you check where you stand? You can easily go to the CII. I think in April they had come out with this corporate governance uh, kind of a charter on corporate governance, the voluntary charter on corporate governance. So they have also given you a very good option of evaluating where you stand. So I would suggest कि इसी को एक checklist बना लो. और अगर आप ऑलरेडी फंडेड हो चुके हो, यू आर गोइंग फॉर नेक्स्ट सीरीज ऑफ फंडिंग, देन यू कैन गो ऑनलाइन, जस्ट गूगल इट के कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस स्कोर कार्ड CII, you will get this template, and it's an online thing. You just go online and see how you fare, or how well you how you rank in the various parameters. कुछ parameters जो है will not be applicable to you. कुछ parameters जो है नए हो सकते हैं. Most of the parameters are strict when you are going for the IPO stage. So depending on what stage you are in, if you are at the initial stage, uske parameters. If you are at the stage of getting funded, but you are not going for an IPO, then there are certain questions. And there is a stage where you are pre-IPO. So you can simply go to this scorecard and evaluate yourself, right? So I think I have taken 26 minutes. So Shiva, I stop here, and I think there are questions. How to clarify which kind of startup will be more resilient amongst so many? See, typically, if I'll clarify it, Shivangi, right? Shivangi, देखो startup की जो प्रजाति होती है, or the category of startup can be just two. Which kind means either you have a private limited company or an LLP. There cannot be multiple kinds of startup. Yes, your business model can change. Say, for instance, you could have a startup which is doing purely online business. You could have a startup which is doing B2B, B2C. So these are business models, right? There are only two kinds of startups entity-wise, legally, that are possible: a private limited company or an LLP. I would always suggest, given a choice, you should always start with an LLP if the funding agency, if the incubator is okay with it. But the awareness of LLP is very low in India. Hence, everybody insists कि आपको एक private limited company बनानी है. Now, how that private limited company is going to sustain in future is all dependent on how you run it. So resilience does not come as a component, or it does not come as a feature of a private limited company. A private company will also fail, a LLP can also fail, or a private company can also survive, a LLP can also survive. It is how you govern that entity that will ensure your resilience. ठीक है शिवांगी? Moving on, how can startups be flexible towards CSR initiative even when they are not legally? I told you, because see, in order to be ESG, this is Akshat's answer, a question. In order to do business, say for instance, I'll just give you a real life example, Tata Tea. अगर आप टाटा टी के वेबसाइट पे जाओगे, देखोगे, Tata Tea will buy its raw materials only from tea gardens which are Trust Tea certified. I've been to Assam. I have a student who's working with me for the past 3 years now. He wanted to get the Trust Tea certification because he wanted to be a supplier to Tata. So आपको अगर टाटा जैसे कंपनी के साथ बिजनेस करना है, तो you have to have Trust Tea certification, which is again based on sustainability, environment, so on and so forth. So देखो, ESG is not an option anymore. It is a mandate if you don't want to lose out on business. अगर आपको टाटा के साथ धंधा करना है, you have to get ESG certified. नहीं करना है, तो don't get any certification. As simple as that. Then I have Shikha's question. What are the things we need to look based? देखो, ये तो I told you, Shikha. I have tried to give you the overall understanding as how to map laws. देखो, लॉ तो दुनिया में बहुत सारे हैं. इन इंडिया, इफ यू गो टू मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ लॉ एंड जस्टिस वेबसाइट, देयर इज अ अल्फाबेटिकल लिस्ट फ्रॉम ए टू जेड फॉर लॉज. अब ये समझना कि कितना मेरे लिए एप्लीकेबल है इज अ टास्क इन इटसेल्फ. बट यू मस्ट अंडरस्टैंड द बिजनेस वेल फर्स्ट. इफ यू अंडरस्टैंड कि मेरे बिजनेस में क्या क्या ऑपरेशंस है, my business will do this, my business will do that, my business will do this. If you know the operations of the business in and out, it will be easier for you to map the relevant law, the regulator, the regulator's ministry, and then the rules and regulations. I'm really sorry, actually I can't remove. Oh, but chalo theek hai. And last, what are the critical components of robust governance for a startup? Difference in US. Yes, this question was there. See, let me tell you, in US, by now you must understand, many things are taken care of by default. ठीक है, अगर आप, I mean, it's a fact. I'm making it on record that in India, I have seen many startups getting funded for the first stage. जो preliminary stage hai, they get funded. Now, when they come to us for larger funding, then I ask myself कि इनको initial funding में पैसे कैसे मिल गए? You understand? Now it's not that the other person did not act properly, or they had some kind of relationship, hence they got funding. But the Indian parameters ourselves are not so robust that they look into so many things like the US. Because you have to understand, a US startup ecosystem is much more well developed. ऐसा नहीं है कि यूएस में स्टार्टअप्स में लोग पैसे डुबोए नहीं है. It is not that कि in US there has been no startup failures. But with experience and time, they have put in place many mechanisms in default, which in India is still developing. In India is still developing. Like say, I'll give you a small example. One of my students, he was manufacturing something related to millets, and he was exporting it. So when he sent the sample to say maybe US, जो food substance था, it was approved. They said कि हाँ, it is a very good quality, food substance is okay, we are ready to buy it. अब उसके बाद कहानी आई कि they need to supply it. अब जब सप्लाई की बात आई, they packaged it in typical वो जो अपना प्लास्टिक्स होते हैं, प्लास्टिक के पैकेजिंग में डाला और यूएस भेज दिया. The moment the final product reached the US customer in a plastic packaging, they rejected it. Now my student was amazed कि ये क्या हो रहा है? How is this happening? It happened not because of the product. There was no problem with the product, but the issue was with the packaging. अब इंडिया में लेट मी टेल यू वेरी ऑनेस्टली, अगर प्रोडक्ट पास हो जाता है, पैकेजिंग पे कोई नेगेटिव मार्किंग नहीं है. कोई नेगेटिव मार्किंग नहीं है. वो आप प्लास्टिक में दो या कांच में दो, वो बिक जाएगा. But maybe in US they understand the impact of ESG much better than us. That's the reason when your packaging is also not conforming with environmental standards, your project gets rejected. What are the basic things and legal requirement needed when planning a startup? This is the most important thing. If you plan, I mean, वो कहते हैं ना कि if you fail to plan, then you plan to fail. Because in the planning stage itself, I would suggest that you spend time on understanding the business, number one. When you understand the business, see, okay, are there related, clearly specified laws in India? ऐसा आप एक theoretical business which is very good in theory or happening in US and UK, you want to bring it into India, the technology is going to help you in India. I am not against it, क्योंकि जब तक आप टेक्नोलॉजी लाओगे नहीं, जैसे कि ये जो फिनटेक हम कर रहे हैं, अगर पेटीएम में ने भी तो किसी ना किसी टाइम पे फर्स्ट इनिशिएटिव लिया होगा. But before getting into the stage of putting money and time or approaching any funding agency, you should understand the legal scenario, the customer base, and profit and cash generation should come last. I have seen many YouTube videos. I've seen people like Steve Jobs. Yeah, they say you should start with a business plan with the customer. देखो बाबा, वो यूएस है, वहां पे ऑलरेडी बहुत सी चीजें इनिशियल स्टेज में बाय डिफॉल्ट फिल्टर आउट हो जाती है. सो यू कैन फोकस ऑन कस्टमर, यू कैन फोकस ऑन यूनिक सेलिंग प्रोपोजिशन, स्टफ लाइक दैट. बट इन इंडिया, प्लीज कीप इन माइंड, यू हैव टू स्टार्ट फ्रॉम द ग्रास रूट. पहला जो है, सी द लीगल फ्रेमवर्क. सेकंड देखो, is there a policy that is going to help you? Third and fourth, last, maybe you can think of the revenue. पैसा बाद में आएगा, पहले आप देखो ना कि आपकी जो business idea है, whether it is feasible or not. Let us understand the parameters of funding by a bank. Banking, देखो, banking have their own rules. They have their own schemes. Like say for instance, if you see SIDBI. Now SIDBI is very pro to funding of startups. On the other hand, if you go to SBI, ICICI, all of them take startup funding as a mere secondary source of income. Unki startup funding is not a priority, right? So when I would suggest कि अगर आप banking parameter of funding देखनी है, you should always approach specialized agencies which are made for startup funding. Now, if you go to SIDBI's website, I'm sure it will have some kind of a checklist. एक चेकलिस्ट होगी, ओनर्स इक्विटी कितना है, कितना दिन पुराना है, ओनर्स पार्टिसिपेशन, दिस दैट डॉक्यूमेंटेशन. So that checklist itself will give you the basic parameters that you need to comply with to get the financing. If you go to ICICI Bank may not be so granular in giving you a checklist, क्योंकि उनके लिए तो ये secondary source of income है, primary नहीं है. So I think, Shiva, I have tried to answer most of the questions. So any other things or anything that you have on your table which was pending, let me know. We still
No,
have
sir.
no.
Thank you
So
so much. I think it was a great session, and I think we have addressed most of the questions that are here. I know a little more about startups now. I had no idea about the
acha,
work
chalo,
they do, etc.
good. But this is just, let me again come back. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But at least my intent is that you should be, you should not go by the typical templates that you see in the market. Okay,
Right.
you go to YouTube or आपने वहां से pitch deck, how to make a pitch deck. You would not believe, I had a student group in BML University. I taught a course there. They have started a startup which will make pitch decks only. मैंने कहा बहुत बढ़िया. Instead of gathering the formats that you have on, on the YouTube or why not have a specialized agency that will guide you from legal, technological side, this and that, for making a pitch deck, because the pitch deck itself is so technical.
Right, sir.
So that's all, or rather, that's all that I could speak of in the given time. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you all had a great session.